You're listening to Perspective on Manx Radio. I'm going to throw over really to one of our guests who has a question for the Chair of Manx Utilities.
Okay, hi Dr. Allinson. I was wondering, I was reading in a report which was published by Tim Woods about the electricity which we sell to the UK to make a profit. We have no carbon tax over here, which means we're exempt from paying more for the electricity we produce by non-renewable means, and it's predicted, it was forecast in 2016 that this year we'd be making something like 4 million from exploiting the carbon tax, which we don't have on Ireland, by selling electricity back to the mainland. So we run our Poolrose power station plant in excess and our Peel power station in excess to sell this energy back to the UK, and it's non-renewable. I see no reason why we're doing this and exploiting the carbon tax.
Okay. Yeah, very good point. Thank you for reading our annual report. You're quite right. The Manx Utilities exports electricity, also imports it as well. We've got a really good energy trading department. There are times, particularly during the winter, where generation facilities in the UK aren't sufficient and they will import electricity at premium price. We export it, and the money we make, the profit we make, we manage to stabilise the prices for consumers here. Now that market is constantly changing in terms of imports and exports. Similarly, when we have got really windy days, we've been importing green energy because we can get it cheaper than the stuff we can supply through gas. So it's quite dynamic, and what we'll probably see is as renewables reduce in price because they're more efficient, we'll be able to supplement some of the power we're producing through oil particularly and gas, and use renewables.
If I could build upon a theme there, we've had an email in from Roger. Roger says, electricity in the Isle of Man is almost exclusively generated from fossil fuels. When is it estimated that the gas turbines at Poolrose Power Station will need replacing? And what environmentally acceptable form of power generation will replace gas at that time?
That's a very good question, because it's all about transition, and I suppose what a lot of the stuff we've been talking about today is transition to a completely different way we run things and we organise our lives. The power station at Poolrose, the gas turbine, will probably need to be decommissioned around about the mid-2030s, which fits in with quite well with a lot of the targets we're setting. And really the big question is what do you replace it with? What Manx Utilities are doing is investing in a very smart grid, so we can swap electricity around, we can deal with the load an awful lot, and we can also balance the load out. One of the problems we have at the moment is during peak times, everyone puts their kettle on at the same time. And so you need that generation capacity to deal with that. If we can even the load out a little bit, we can then look at investing in renewables. And we're going to be having to do this sort of in this decade to replace Poolrose. So what we need to do is look at things like solar panels, look at wind farms, either onshore or offshore, which we know work and are very efficient, but also look to the future for tidal and also for wave generation, and anything else we can find to actually produce power that's sustainable and environmentally friendly.
On the tidal point, so Chief Minister Howard Quayle campaigned on a manifesto, and he won on a manifesto in which he promised or made commitments toward tidal energy and wind energy. And he's not fulfilled those promises, and we're 3 years into the administration.
Well, can I correct you on that? Because actually two deals were done with private investors who wanted to explore the possibilities of tidal energy, particularly in the south of the island. Neither of them have actually managed to do anything about that. So that again was leaving up to private companies to actually produce the templates, do the research. But unfortunately, at the moment, because of the economies of it, they weren't able to do anything. That will change as we get better technologies in the future.
Why are we relying on private companies to provide a public service? I mean, why was the public option not even considered?
Because of the expense of those technologies and the fact that they're quite experimental at the moment. One of the legacy issues from previous administrations is that Manx Utilities has got a big debt that we need to pay off. So we're caught with a whole lot of different priorities. We've got to pay off the debt, we've got to make sure we've got energy security, we've got to meet environmental targets, and we've got to keep prices reasonable for people to actually use the power. And it's tying all those together.
I'll come back to the debt in a little bit, if you wouldn't mind. Another message in, this is from Graham, who asks, the UK and many other jurisdictions release real-time figures for CO2 emissions versus electricity generation, so that citizens and devices can choose when best to charge or run. Why hasn't Manx Utilities done this, and when does it plan to do so?
Yeah, again, a very good question. One of the aspects we're looking into with our smart metering system is bringing in time of use tariffs so that people will actually get a benefit from using electricity in those off-peak times. With the gas generation at the moment, if we can run it to 100% efficiency, it's more efficient. So if we can try to balance out that load, we can allow people to switch to using their devices or their washing machines, dishwashers, charging their car at different times of the day, balance the load out, get a more efficient grid, but also hopefully be beneficial to them in terms of the bills they're going to be paying.
If we are already exporting power to the UK, and we do have to pay the debt as it is, surely if we just build wind turbines, that additional excess capacity can be sold off to the UK, and when we do eventually decommission the power station, there's that smooth transition. You don't have those same issues with debt. I mean, it seems to be a profit win-win solution. Why have we not seen any movement on this?
Okay, because the demand from the UK is very changeable. As I said, sometimes we sell to the UK, other times when they've got a surplus, we buy from the UK if it's the right price. I think you're right, though. One of the main impetuses of the policy set out by the Devon Minister through the consultation are decarbonising the economy and electrifying it. So if we can switch to electric vehicles, if we can switch to electric heating of homes, if we build up the energy demand, that increase in energy demand will be met by renewables. And that's how you get a transition between getting investment in renewables, meeting increased demand, but also paying off a debt so that your generation isn't having to pay for the broken promises of previous ones.
Just finally on this, Dr. Allinson, you've mentioned about the Manx Utilities debt. Those with a medium-length political memory will remember some of the pretty astonishing figures around that. Are your hands tied because of that context in this administration?
They're not tied, but they are slightly restrained because, as I said, in terms of paying off that debt, that's really important. I don't want to saddle the future generations with that. Last year, the Treasury Minister and Tynwald agreed to write off £95 million of that debt, so we've got it down, but we need to pay that off. So that means that we need to use the assets we've got and we've paid for to their maximum potential. It means that it'd be quite difficult to suddenly close it all down and walk away with that debt. But what we can do is actually transition paying off that debt with moving to renewables. So I'm hoping that we can, as we get in certainly into the next decade, we can see increased renewable use on the island. We can see the smarter grid, and we can see a much brighter future.
One thing that is deeply frustrating, though, is that we didn't see any really massive discussion around the £95 million of debt that get written off. There's some grumbles and complaints, but this was something that was simply allowed to happen. Whereas the cost of free public transport on the Isle of Man would be about £6 million per year. We can buy a boat worth £100 million. It's weird that when cost becomes an issue, cost is only an issue when it comes to doing the responsible or the correct thing, and the government has no problem just burning piles of money when it comes to doing something strange or frivolous or something that's otherwise considered essential.
I slightly disagree with that, because the main reason the £95 million debt reduction was agreed by Treasury was to make sure that the price increases that we were going to have to make for consumers were mediated. So it was all based on an economic model that to pay off that debt, we'd have to increase prices well above inflation. We've now committed to inflation-only increases for at least the next 5 years. So that £95 million, a lot of that went back into people's pockets in terms of reducing the future cost of electricity.